Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to TheDaak Baithak. As most of you have been joining us regularly, you would know that we started this weekly Saturday. Every Saturday we meet. It's a weekly talk that we have in which we invite scholars from different disciplines who come and talk to us about their work. Some of this work is something that they worked on for their PhDs, which means there's a lot of passion, energy, and time that has gone into it. And some others, conversations that we've had, some others have come to us and spoken to us about ideas that they're still thinking about. So a Baithak is actually an extension of the work that we do with the TheDaak Review. TheDaak started as a book review journal 2 years ago. Subsequently, it was expanded to be a double-blind peer review journal that also accepts all kinds of submissions, including research articles, research essays, etc. We've also expanded the TheDaak project into a TheDaak reading group, which is anchored by some of our younger friends from Delhi University, where we meet every month. We read a fiction and a non-fiction. And in extension of that conversation, we've been trying to push the envelope for young scholars, early career researchers. And in that, with that spirit in that lane, Baithak is an extension of the larger project that we aim at, which is to build a space for newer conversations by early career researchers. And today, I feel a great sense of great privilege and honor to invite Dr. Pushpita Mitra with us. Of course, for a lot of speakers who've come here have said we've been friends, we've known each other, but Pushpita and I have known each other in a very specific capacity. We both were fellow researchers at the same university. We've probably also seen each other struggle with our PhD works. And a small anecdote before I introduce her more formally, there were times that she would she would take long walks and she would be very contemplative. And I once asked her, I said, "Do you think about your arguments? Do you reflect on your PhD work?" And she said, "Yeah, it helps me. It helps me build together my arguments." And on that note, some of the writings, even fiction writing that comes to us, where walking is considered to be a great meritorious activity for thinking and reading. So on that small little personal anecdote, I would like to invite Dr. Pushpita Mitra in a more formal capacity. Dr. Mitra has a PhD from the Department of Theatre and Performance Studies, School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU. She's currently working at the Archives and Research Center for Ethnomusicology, American Institute of Indian Studies, Gurgaon. Her research engages with the cultural and critical study of South Asian music. And today she's going to be talking to us about locating the modern in Indian music, technology, publicness, and the politics of category making in the first half of 20th century. Pushpita, I welcome you. And Dr. Mitra has 25 to 30 minutes. Of course, we've never kind of restricted ourselves with time. So if you have more to say, we are here. And then the format is that this would be followed by some discussant remarks by Pratham, who's a student at Ambedkar University. He's reading development, but he's also interested in conversations that involve cultural, political, and public culture. And then we'll open the session for question answers. Over to you, Pushpita.
Thank you, Jigyasa. So before I begin, I hope I'm audible. Yeah. So before I begin, I'm really indebted to Jigyasa and the entire team of TheDaak for inviting me for this talk. And like she already mentioned, whatever I'm going to talk about today, this has been culled out from my research project, what I did for my PhD. And my PhD was more Bengal-centric, but here I have tried to make it more open, tried to make it more broad. But I'm afraid since most of my archival works dealt with Bengal, so the examples that I'm going to present would be Bengal-centric. So, and also like I have presented, I have prepared a written document so that I can be on time. So I'll start reading the paper. Thank you. In the many theorizations around modernity, its impacts upon Indian culture have predominantly dealt with the visual worlds of fine arts, theatre, dance, literature, and cinema. not fully exploring the sonic realms of music. The existing literature on music modernity has taken high arts, classical music as its prime locus. While the forging of Indian classical music undoubtedly remained one of the biggest mainstream cultural projects of the 19th and 20th centuries, colliding with parallel socio-political developments around nationalism, modernity's engagement with the popular genres of music remains ignored. This intermediate period was a significant moment for the history of Indian music at large, because music, with the support of print and the newly arrived recording technologies, was opening up to a wider public from its niche exclusive doors. By taking the popular commercial musical domains alongside the classical genres of music, I intend to highlight the heterogeneity of music modernity within the Indian subcontinent. Music played an active part in forging communities and publics. Multiple musical ecosystems evolved alongside multiple genres of music, defining the understanding of musical publicness, which then ultimately represented the modern spirit of democracy. The impetus behind forging a classical music of India was fueled by a strong sentiment of nationalism. A group of English-educated social-cultural reformers come musicologists arrived, whose activities reflected a cultural angst. They paradoxically borrowed models of the West to define an indigenous sovereign identity distinct from the West. The larger understanding of the classical arts at this time was carved out by excavating material histories of an ancient past, predominantly Sanskrit and Vedic literature. The first requirement that the reformers felt necessary was to provide a written base to a music tradition that was predominantly oral in practice. Several modules of notating music inspired by the Western staff notation were experimented with and introduced at this juncture. Musicologists from Bengal and later the Maharashtra region, like Shorendra Mohan Tagore, Krishnadhan Bandhopadhyay, Vishnu Narayan Bhatkhande, Vishnu Digambar Paluskar, emerged as some of the dominant figures who proposed and debated for many different models and systems suited to the tonal structures of Indian music. The readability of music had two motives: A, music preservation, and B, music circulation among the masses at large. These modernist initiatives were intended to blow up the traditional guild-like associations, what we understand as gharanas, of the musical ustads and pandits, where music passed down within the exclusive hereditary lines. Branding them as backward, the reformers unanimously believed that these closed practices of music learning had the possibility of bringing perilous results in the future, as the musical arts could die out with the musicians. An effort was hence made to retrieve the music from these traditional masters with, and sometimes without their support. Musical notation was simultaneously conceived with the vision of creating music schools that would ensure the high arts music education for the masses at large, especially the women of the upper caste, upper middle class, gentrified backgrounds. Through the faces of these women, Victorian morality was brought into play. A purified, respected image of the music was aimed at by substituting the traditional dubious class of women courtesans. The first half of the 20th century, the two music modernizers who ultimately succeeded in revolutionizing the high art music of the royal courts of North India were the two Chitpavan Marathi Brahmins, Vishnu Digambar Bhatkhande and Vishnu Digambar Paluskar. The Khayal musical tradition, practiced and patronized in the royal courts, was forged as the classical music of North India. Down in the south, music of the temples performed by the Devadasi community was appropriated as the classical music of South India. Paluskar's Gandharv Mahavidyalaya found its stronghold for Hindustani classical music, and the Madras Music Academy became the leading institution for establishing the Carnatic classical music of South India. Musical structuralization in India, however, never stopped the musicians from their creative endeavor, which meant transgression, and breaking imposed musical boundaries and structures. When the rest of the country was at its epitomic phase for classicizing and structuralizing music, Bengal witnessed a parallelly different sentiment on its musical front through the young rebellious figure of Rabindranath Tagore. In 1881, when Tagore was just 20 years old, he gave a public lecture on music titled Shongito Bhav, or Music and Feelings. Tagore in the lecture questioned the traditional norms and practices of high art ragdari music and proposed his song compositions, which would be eventually known as Rabindra Sangeet, as an alternative model of praxis. Tagore did not disband the melodious frameworks of Indian music associated as the rags, but what he disapproved was how the masters had been presenting them. Having a strong urge for creative freedom, Tagore believed that the traditional ragdari musical genres did not fully unfurl their emotions and their affective side. In the following years of his artistic journey, Tagore realized his defeat in uprooting this age-old musical system altogether, and his musical corpus ended up being a subsidiary regional component. His visions, however, created and inspired an alternative space in Indian music to adopt an eclectic hybrid path. Through his musical ideas, he underlined that it does not matter what musical component is incorporated and adopted, till the time they do justice in invoking feelings in the hearts of its listeners. Tagore's musical quest also enabled in diluting the strict structures, strict spheres of the high and the low arts, which had existed in Indian music until that time. The historian Reba Shom notes in this context, and I quote, "Music performed by courtesans had been for the exclusive recreation of men, while folk music, which was more participatory, was considered too rustic and awkward for the urban sophisticate. The Tagore family and the Brahmo Samaj released music from such narrow confines, and in the participation in music by family members, including the women of the Tagore household, who were exposed to folk music of rural Bengal, classical ustadi music as well as Western classical music, an element of eclecticism was introduced which epitomized the Nabojug, meaning the new era that Rabindranath had welcomed," unquote. Musical hybridization instilled new musical values, carrying new imaginations of the musical public. With the popularity of the gramophone, radio, and cinema, one would find the emergence of a varied, hybridized musical genres from multiple vernacular setups, but resonated with the value systems voiced by Tagore in his first lecture on music in 1881. Within Bengal, new commercial musical genres of Adhunik Bangla Gan, meaning modern Bengali songs, and Rag Pradhan Gan emerged, much like the Marathi Natya Sangeet and Marathi Sugam Sangeet, which came to be associated as the light classical genres of post-independent India. These musical genres incorporated musical elements of traditional Indian raga music, indigenous folk music, as well as the elements of Western music in the form of rhythmic beats, orchestral and instrumental accompaniment, and in in-between pieces of interludes within the song numbers. These light genres received rampant popularity, and with their incorporation in the films, these genres constituted the key elements of popular Indian music. Musical hybridization thus paved the way for creative freedom. The short song format produced through the recording industries was inspired by the Western models of lyric poetry. This instilled a consciousness for upholding vernacular musical literariness that eventually also provided a base for strengthening the regional linguistic identity at par with the pan-Indian national identity. In their spree to uproot the traditional musical structures of exclusivity, the music reformers ended up producing exclusive structures of their own. Their modernist endeavors catered to the newly emergent middle-class publics having a sound literary background. The spheres of print appealed specifically to his new class of educated literati. From the 1930s onwards, however, the musical sphere would further see another wave of transformation with the popularity of the recording industries of gramophone and radio. Gramophone and radio, together with the print, now captured the attention of an even wider mass of both the educated and the uneducated classes and across genders. The change in the publicness occurred through new musical cultures. One would observe more private, personalized spaces like the drawing rooms for music listening and practice. One of the quintessential characteristics of music modernity across the subcontinent was that it operated from an urban base of colonial city spaces. Folk culture, or lok sanskriti, formed a central part of this urban modern imagination, which was often seen from an Orientalist lens. For the early indigenous romanticists like Tagore, folk or the rural village culture was regarded as a repository of an authentic past. It provided a sheen of popular legitimacy and imagination in the quest to derive a sovereign national culture. This romanticist imagination of the folk had also received severe criticism and artistic backlash from the realist avant-garde group in Bengal, like Buddhadev Bose and Kazi Nazrul Islam. They would believe that such imagination only partially exposed the world of the rural folk and concealed the everyday realities of hardships. The arrival of the folk culture into the city spaces, according to Sumanta Banerjee's significant work, Parlour and the Streets, occurred from a process of migration and settlement for financial upliftment. The folk, rustic, rural performance cultures in the cities were initially supported by the zamindars of colonial Calcutta, but soon began to be marginalized when the gentrified Bhadralok aesthetics and moral values evolved and a purification mission began. They were seen as the poor, low-life cultures, unfit for the upper and middle-class consumption. This folk urban poor, a term that Banerjee used, however, doesn't die out completely. With the coming in of the popular market of print and later the commercially produced music, the cultural elements of these urban poor were reintroduced, or these groups of people were tapped into to forge the very base of the musical commerce. The light musical genres received a commercial boom when talkies arrived, and they began to be substituted as film music. In a newspaper article, the popular Bengali singer Hemanta Mukherjee attested this by stating that a film in India was judged by its musical outlook. And the audience of these films and a large chunk of these film goers did not belong to the educated classes. Their main fascination with the films was because of their love for the songs. New musical value systems also got established with the idea of simple, easy, and accessible music, which catered to those who could absorb and perform with basic musical instincts. The commercial musical genres gave birth to many performers from such groups of listeners as Hemant Mukherjee, who, with a musically gifted voice, but without a proper classical training in music, recorded songs and became widely popular. The only argument that was underlined in such contexts was that music should be in tune and should be capable of touching the souls of the common masses. Music must be for all, including the common masses. The socialist bent of the light commercial musical genres has historically stood in conflict and tussle with the value systems of the traditionalists and purists worldwide, seen with a skeptical lens as the biggest factors of polluting and denigrating the standards of musical culture. These popular commercial musical genres for the longest period were never considered worthy enough to be studied, reflected, or even written about. The program schedules of several stations of the All India Radio would attest to the fact that the popular commercially produced music was everywhere in high demand, despite the state authorities' many regulations and censorship policies to filter them from getting seeped among the common public. But such policies would often fail due to major economic losses and setbacks, and in the process would be forced to recognize them as a distinct genre. When the Akashvani in the post-independent period came under the wings of government authorization, it had to keep a separate slot for broadcasting popular film music. Similarly, the Sangeet Natak Academy, in its first music seminar held in 1957, had to recognize the influence of popular musical genres in India and had invited the exponents of the film world like Pankaj Malik, Keshav Rao Bhole, and V. Nagaya to speak on the subject. So to come back to the question of where and how we should locate the elements of the modern and Indian music, it undoubtedly began with a particular historical time when a flux of ideas and social movements began. It was people-centric and heterogeneous in its form without a linear path. The modern left its marks and traces in the musical sphere and phases, and in the processes of cultural exchanges, both with the West and within the country, amidst different parts and regions, it advocated against parochialism of any kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Pushpita, Dr. Mitra. I hope I'm audible because I moved to a different earpiece in terms of connecting to the internet. Thank you so much for that comprehensive presentation. We would now request Pratham Gupta, who's our discussant today. Pratham, are you here?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Sure. Due to network problem, I can't really open my camera. So sorry for that. So I would just because I would probably then get disconnected if I do that. So I will just go go like this. So firstly, thank you so much for the talk. It was really comprehensive, interesting. As someone who doesn't have much knowledge about music and its history and how it has evolved, it was really interesting to talk to you and also read the papers that you suggested. Almost all of them were very, very interesting. So I just have two questions. Mostly the first one is about, so you have talked about how the emergence coming into being of modernity in India engenders a very distinct publicness, and that publicness is revolving around music. So now the music is now in the
Revolving
open.
around? Sorry,
Uh,
revolving around? I didn't get the word.
yeah, the publicness revolving around music.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because both the music and the artist are now in the open. And why is it so? Because of patronage, dismantling and social and political turmoil. And what then happens is that new technologies of gramophone and radio, as you talked, also reshape the nature of these publics. So I was wondering how the mainstream nationalist imagination engaged with this publicness. In other words, how are these emerging modern publics co-opted for the construction of a hegemonic Indian identity? So that was one. A second, relatedly, I was also wondering. I'm extending our frame, the period we are studying, to a bit later. I'm also interested how the independent post-colonial nation state incorporated these publics, and how they sort of incorporated them in the nation building processes themselves. How nation building came to be done through these musical publics. And relatedly, another question I had was about the idea of Hindustani and Carnatic music as these, hegemonic homogenizing categories, and how they are based on inclusion and exclusion. So, if you could comment on that. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Pratham. Yeah, Pushpita.
So if I'm correct, the first question you're asking that how the mainstream is dealing with the popular publicness that's appearing through the gramophone and the radio. So at this time, I find a disjuncture in the musicological texts that is getting produced and what is actually happening in practice. So the mainstream is focusing on building, because it's focusing on institutionalization. So the musicological texts and also most of the writings around music that is happening until 50s and 60s, they're mostly dealing with the high arts. We would not find any mentioning of this new popular genre. It is only in the musical writings, it is only coming much later, late 60s, late 70s. So that was the cultural politics, I can say. That was the thing that I'm finding. So these musicologists and whatever this mainstream, the mainstream is deciding what is being recorded and written around music. And the second question, if you could repeat the second question,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
It's related to the first only. I was wondering how the nationalist imagination steps into this question of musical publics. That is to say, how nationalists, especially those of the Hindu nationalist kind, see this musical public and how they sort of employ it to construct a hegemonic Indian identity. And related to it was the question of how the post-colonial independent nation state through, for instance, let's say All India Radio or through the government academies, it also contributed to music now being seen as an element of nation building processes. You know, how music itself becomes a terrain of contestation and how it becomes a terrain where identity, especially national identities, are articulated.
Right. So it's actually interesting how the mainstream Hindu nationalists see the musical culture. So of course, there's a lot of censorship that's happening. So the main attack also happens on the wives and the baijis, who were, interestingly, when the gramophone industry was coming in, it was they who were recording the music, the classical music, what we understand today. It was this class it was these women performers who were shifting to the gramophone industries in the early periods, late 20s, 30s. So it was they who were more open to these new recording technologies, and not even the ustads, fearing that there were few ustads who had these who held these myths that if we record for the gramophones, our voice will go away. So somewhere this thing was happening, but from the 40s onward, as the purification process is happening, patronization is gone. Somehow, with the help of the All India Radio, where they were not allowed to perform anymore, the Tawaids and the Baijis, they completely get disappeared. And in their place comes these new middle class women performers. And in these regards, I think I see a nexus between the male ustads and some of the state social reformers. So it was slightly gendered also. And the third one was how in the post-colonial, that was the question, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
During the post-colonial period. Yeah. So of course, like the importance of the classical music could never be, it was always there from this when these movements started. So the classical music would always have this dominant position. And then comes the other subsidiary forms, like the light genres, and therefore how they would be termed. That's also interesting, because if we look at some of these other genres like the Rag Pradhan or the Marathi Natya Sangeet, the elements of the classical elements are equally there, equally present in these genres, but they would always be put in a secondary position. So they would be recognized, but they would always be distinctly looked at from the classical arts, though they are highly popular. So that's what was happening.
Thank you, Pushpita. I think that answers the three questions that Pratham has raised. We have another question in the text chat box, and if there are any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand and address them to the speaker. The question says, and I'll read it out loud for everybody. Thank you for a brilliantly concise framing, Pushpita. How do you read the cultural ostracization of Debabrata Biswas at the hands of Vishwabharati when Biswas tried to move away from the codified notations of Rabindra Sangeet? What happened to Tagore's project of modernity at that hour? It's a sharp question. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for asking this question, because it then throws light on how this music, how these processes are like a cycle, be it at the national level or be it at the regional level of the state. So interestingly, Tagore comes across as his stand was somewhat hypocritical towards the later phase of his life, because towards the early phase, when he's rebelling against the strict structures, how the traditional pundits and the ustads are putting strict structures around music, and he's creating his own genres. He's creating his own music, naming that this is the creative freedom. But interestingly, he adopts some of the same things which he was rebelling against. So when Vishwabharati comes, the same sort of classicization process, the same kind of censorship, the same kind of institutionalization, and whenever the institutionalization element comes in, this process of, okay, this is allowed, this is not allowed. He's very much concerned about who is singing my songs and how they are being sung. So the same kind of censorship process is coming. So what I can then sense that the social reformation, whatever this is happening in the early 20th century, it somehow carried this anxiety. It somehow carried this anxiety, and they would often like slip away from their position of between this is something which is creative freedom, but then also we have to standardize it in order to define our identity through music, and also how the music should be carried forward. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pushpita. There's another question by Sakshi Sharda, is also part of the editorial team at TheDaak. Thank you for the engaging talk. I was a little intrigued with the archive and its reading in the project. If you could share with us some details of what the music archives look like and shed some light on the methodology of the research project.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, archive played a big part in my research, and they were mostly, I was definitely looking at the music, but I was studying this music through the texts that were available around music. And at that time, I was questioning how the musical engagement is happening, like what were the musical discourses that were being run in the public sphere. So the first text, which was very crucial for me, is Tagore's very crucial work on music, Shongit Chinta. So they were, this Shongit Chinta is a compilation of his works, his ideas on music, where, and it is basically a compilation of the various writings that he had done, and also the various public lectures that he had conducted. So Vishwabharati had compiled it in a book. So I studied that, which had letters with the other contemporary music critics of that time. So I was also interested in looking at the music critics who are emerging. So through that also, I was studying how, of course, like people like Tagore, they are the music makers, but also the listeners, how the listening community is engaging with this music, and also how are they expressing about music. So the newspaper columns become an interesting read in my project. So yes, through this I stepped in.
There's another longer question by, I could be wrong, but it says Pandita Das. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. Yeah. It says, thank you for the talk. I heard your fine PhD presentation and loved it. So I joined in today again. And thanks for your influential formulation of modernity, quote unquote, in the 1940s, brought into being with radio and gramophone, as you say. I was curious where you'd situate later technologies like cassettes and even further today's streaming platforms that have ushered into being unique music cultures, a new sense of quote unquote public, in ways that perhaps bring into scene marginalized figures to a great extent than the earlier technologies did. Thank you.
The same. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So I think 40s and 50s were the time gramophone basically starts this process. And then it picks up from there. And now it is even more diverse. The public got even more diverse with cassettes. And currently now we are in the digital forum. It's even more diverse now. But yeah, with more advancement in the technology, different kinds of public also started engaging in. So the opening process further gets spread out in interesting ways. So that's what I can say.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Any other comments, concerns? Yeah. Want to know what is the current situation of old classical gharana and ustad, and what do you think, do they need patronage?
Okay, this is a completely different sphere, but I'll definitely try to answer it. The gharanas have definitely, if we talk about the strict classical world of gharanedar music, definitely even there, the situation has transformed drastically through institutions like Sangeet Research Academy in Kolkata. The gharanas are also not operating the way it used to be earlier. Now the very understanding, there are like many specialists who are working on gharanas. And is there any gharana, the authentic idea of gharana anymore, or was there ever? So that is also a very questionable thing. So it is like there are many specialists out there who are working on this area. But yeah, the gharanedar, whatever this gharanedar learning, it couldn't be uprooted completely. It was challenged. It was challenged by these music reformers, but it was still intact right there, because a lot of limitations came across through these new learning modules that these modernists offered, Bhatkhande and Paluskar. There were a lot of limitations around such kind of musical learning. So people had to fall back to the, again, older traditional systems of what we call as the Sina Basina learning of the Guru Shishya Parampara. And the situation of the patronage has also changed drastically, because now there are these business institutes, the corporate houses, who have now become the biggest patronizers. Of course, the state is there, but we do find a big contribution of these corporate houses who have been supporting the artistic, the classical arts. if we go to these classical concerts, so all these big industries are now backing up in their CSR projects for all the classical. So that's how it is managing to sustain even today. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. Any other questions?
I have a small question.
Yes, Pratham, please go ahead.
Thank you, madam, for the presentation. My question is on the role of power in politics that you mentioned. That the labels of classical, folk, and popular sound neutral, but they are also political choices. Who, in your view, benefited most from these categories in early 20th century, and who got left out?
Sorry, if you could repeat the question, like I didn't really.
The labels of classical, folk, and popular. But they were also political choices in the early 20th century. Who, in your view, benefited most, and which categories got left out? Now that we have seen the emergence of music, all those new categories, so how far the categorization is, influenced by politics, and which categories benefited from certain kind of politics, and which categories of music got left out? That is my question. That some of the musical forms were marginalized, and some others were, brought to the center. So I just want to know your view.
Yeah. Definitely the this politics behind the categorization, definitely it was about the music, what the music was, and a lot of it had to do with who were the performers of these music. A lot of the politics was dependent on that. Who are the performing communities? And we have seen in the region of Punjab that the Mirasis were the Mirasis, and a lot of these so-called genealogists who were repositories of some of the like musical elements, some of the unknown ragas and unknown elements of what we understand today as the classical musical arts. But very consciously, through the new state and the nexus of these upper caste social reformers, they mapped out that we are going to take away the music, but we are not fully going to incorporate the performers along with the music. So that was a very conscious politics that was happening along with the All India Radio. Like just to give an example, like in All India Radio, like I said, the female performers of the Tawaif background, they were not allowed to sing. And so yeah, but later on, over the few decades, whatever we are singing, these tumris and all these things, all these material archives that we have today, that we go back and listen to, they were all created by these phenomenal women performers. So that's how things are operating. That's how things operated in the early 20th century.
Thank you for that question, Sam, and both Dr. Sudhamsha and Dr. Pushpita Mitra for responding to those questions. Any other questions or concerns?
I didn't introduce myself before asking the question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I'm sure Dr. Mitra here does not know who you are, but I know is why I decided to kind of do that. So, not necessarily a question, but as a student of politics, and I was wondering how interestingly and how deeply your work could very well be a work of politics and a work that kind of reflects on the and this is me kind of taking on from what Pratham also said in the discussion about nation building and nationalism. And when you were speaking in terms of a public sphere coming up, I was thinking about, Anderson's imagined communities. And I was thinking in terms of the Rabindra Sangeet or the modern music, the templates of modern music, or the ideas, or the or for that matter, all of freedom struggle music that emerged, including the national song, the national anthem. All these conversations that were so new to the political context, and therefore you could have only gone back for inspiration and not for ideas, right?
Right.
So I was thinking in terms of how, if one were thinking of music, and especially, I mean, I'm not familiar with, the field that you've been speaking about. I was thinking the often repeated problem that, say, musicians in Pakistan after partition had, where they were like, most of Khusro and most of that music was actually, ode to either to Krishna or to Rama, and how deeply this music, including classical music or classical dance, actually, Hindustani music was catering to a certain kind of element of religiosity, and the fact that Qawwali or Khyal was the closest that Pakistani musicians could take away from that conversation. So I was wondering that if one were to think out loud, and I'm assuming that your work is alluding to that kind of, for the lack of better word, a sanitization or a project of nation building on the Anderson kind of imagination of the music, as if it's imagination of a new nation project. And in that sense, the other questions that have come up about the limitations of the project of modernity itself, in terms of, say, Sufi music that emerges and speaks of the relations, completely alters. This is a progressive take on relationship between the God and the way that bhakti completely changes the way we also imagine religion. So one was wondering that from what you've just said, for this project of nation building, do you think building a category of modern music, and I don't mean modern music in the sense of contemporary modern, but I mean in the sense the way you've spoken of modernity, and how modernity pushes certain kinds of music to emerge as, do you think that it served the project that it took? Did it do well to kind of make available more subversive, more inclusive, but also more fluid and more flexible ways in which music could be both about challenging power, but also about incorporating conversations that, say, archive with the capital A, or the canon, the classical with the capital C, or the canonical music with the capital C may not have taken? That's the question, coming more from the politics side of the frame. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And there's no one answer. So everything was existing right at the same time. So that's what I wanted to map out here, that of course there is canon building happening, but also there are challenges to those, there are artistic challenges, I would like to say, artistic challenges to those, against those canon building. And it's again like a cycle. And it's also appearing like a cycle. So something which is emerging as as an alternative, or as a transgressatory act today, is tomorrow becoming the new norm, and tomorrow become the new canon. So it's I see that as a cycle. So things are getting appropriated, even if we are to say what today we understand as khayal. Like, there are scholars out there who have written about it a lot, what khayal is today. Khayal is going through the same process from its earlier form of Drupad. So I think historically it's like a cycle. So it depends on the people, like, who are using it for what purpose, for identity construction, And also sometimes the music, like later on when Bangladesh is getting formed, like that's again another history between the Qazi Nazrul Islam and Bangladesh's cultural politics. So yeah, it's interesting that how so many songs that Nazrul had written completely in a different context find new meaning when the language right movements started occurring in Bangladesh during the 50s and 60s. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. To me, it seems that we do not have any other questions. Yeah, so on that note, we will conclude the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Pushpita Mitra. I will take this time to thank you for taking out the time and trusting the DAAK as a platform to come and share your PhD work and some of the things that you've been working with for years now. I would also like to thank Pratham Gupta for being a discussant today, for very diligently reading the papers that were shared and also bringing some of these beautiful questions for all of us to think about. And I'm sure for Dr. Mitra here also to kind of ponder upon later. I also thank all other participants who took out the time and asked questions and stayed with us. Thank you so much. We do this every Saturday at 4 p.m. And for all other kinds of conversations, which would probably be around something related to one of these academic themes, you can always join and look out for what we're doing next. We are all over the social media platform. And I don't want to sound like a marketing expert who then reads out all of those, but you get the drag, you'll be able to find us. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.